Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're speaking with Harry McKaig, CEO of Double Cross Vodka. Harry's been definitely a beverage industry veteran, over 20 years of experience, I think, just spanning about every corner of the alcohol CPG world, from Anheuser-Busch, Diageo, Southern Glazers, Pernod Ricard, as well as I think running the wine group, or oversaw 250 million plus run rate. So definitely a lot of great experience in the space. So excited to get into it. Harry, maybe just kind of like first off for listeners that maybe aren't that familiar with Double Cross, I'd love to just kind of start off with just kind of quick lay of the land, just in terms of kind of the origin story, why behind the brand, kind of core product, what makes it different. And then if you want to throw out a few places that people can get their hands on, and maybe new places, new doors you just got in, and then we'll go from there.
Just having the time I've spent, working on big brands like Absolut and just seeing the way the industry has evolved over the past several decades, because it's really been over decades. If you look at the largest category, which still remains vodka, and you go back all the way to the 50s and 60s, and you look at a brand like Smirnoff, which was the first real spirits campaign in the US, they were talking about it leaves you breathless. And it was this clean, light, versatile, everyday drinking kind of product. And it really brought a whole new wave of consumers into the vodka category as a premium product. Fast forward to 70s and 80s, you called the kind of the golden age of print advertising. Swedish government, which owned Absolut at the time, really needed a new export market. And so they thought, okay, let's run some ads in the United States and see if this is something that grows on its own. And sure enough, we all know how well the print advertising campaigns did with Absolut. And all of a sudden you had people spending at the time, which was kind of crazy, $12 or $13 on a bottle of Absolut in the 70s and 80s. Come the 90s, you start seeing the Nolet family with Kettle One, Sidney Frank, industry titan at the time, real character in the 2000s with Grey Goose, and Grey Goose kind of owned the 2000s and 2010s. And so you've seen this trade up and this evolution, this premiumization in the vodka space. And when our founders went to go look at what type of spirit category they would like to build, they wanted to go for the biggest and the largest, and they knew that there was going to be a trade up in the vodka category. And so they went to probably close to 68 different distilleries over the course of 2 years in search for who could make the next best product. And we landed on Double Cross, which really sits at the Tatras Mountains in Slovakia, which is just south of Poland. And we found this wonderful distilling family who's been doing it for 11 generations and who had experience in beer, wine, and vodka making, and stole the best of all of it and developed the Double Cross brand, which, if those are familiar with the badge, is really a tribute to the Slovakian coat of arms. And so that's really how the story developed and came to market. And we're one of the very few brands that have ever gotten, especially in the vodka category, a 95 points from Wine Enthusiast. And as you and I have both been in the wine business, we know how hard it is to get 89 to 90s with wine, flavorful, aged, dynamic products. And so we think we really nailed it with the quality of the packaging, and we're positioning ourselves for that. And I think from a latest and greatest kind of new doors, we've actually been much more disciplined over the past few months, especially, but primarily in just really focusing on where we have a really good consumer base, where we have excellent distribution and retail partners, and we are going much deeper and not wide, and really trying to leverage that brand equity and drive velocity versus spread ourselves too thin. And that strategy, I think, is starting to really take hold and giving us a bit of a J curve on not just sales, but just the number of consumers we're able to engage with and follow up and build customer loyalty. And so far, so good.
It's funny you mentioned Absolut. I feel like they really transcended, because I remember I would have friends that would like cut out the magazine ads of Absolut, and they would create collages with them and like put them on their wall, and they weren't even close to drinking age, but they just thought they were so cool. So I definitely resonate with, they kind of transcended.
Yeah, no, it's wild. Those are the days where we actually had magazines delivered, and we'd cut out
Right.
our favorite cars and our favorite TV stars and all that stuff, and litter our walls with other people's advertisement.
Exactly. Well, anyways, there's just a lot of volatility in BevAlc in general, a lot of ups and downs depending on who you're talking about, which category, which brand. Like, I'm just kind of curious. It's just at like a high level from your perspective. What does the state of BevAlc look like today?
I think the headlines are little misleading, right? Your 30-second sound bites, there's a lot of them. People love to
Yeah.
bash alcohol, but the core economic data that we see in the personal consumption expenditures, show continued growth. If you look at some of the latest reporting from some of the large strategics, we're starting to finally normalize a little bit. And in our industry, it takes a little bit longer. I'm lucky. I can produce vodka off the still, put it in a boat, ship it to the US, sell it the next day. If you look at the portfolios from some of the larger strategics, they've got aged goods in there. Some things like scotch that might need to be laid down for 12 years. And so when you talk about forecasting into the future, it's very hard to kind of make these predictions. And the last thing you want is to not have enough product. But it takes much longer for the larger players to adapt financially because the investment, the CapEx, sometimes is 5 to 10 years out in a lot of these things. And so not every year looks good. So I really think you need to draw a straight line much further out into the future. And if you do that, the business looks much less volatile than the headlines would suggest.
Yeah.
And listen, these products have been around since, for thousands of years, 9,000 years at this point. They're core to socialization as much as, even the rest of the sin stocks like tobacco has shifted form to zins and snus and vapes and some things. Like a lot of these things are more ingrained than we'd like to think. And I just think more resilient than a lot of the short term thinking investors really take note of.
I think that's a great way to put it. I had another guy on the podcast a while back who's had a lot of years in the BevAlc space as well. He works for a whiskey brand, and he said something that resonated with me. The term that he used, he described it. He said the BevAlc and a distro space has become like the NBA, just in terms of it's kind of a players league, meaning like the big conglomerates, they really kind of set the priorities for the distributors, command all the attention, and kind of leave like the smaller brands to kind of fend for themselves in terms of from a selling perspective and merchandising perspective, and can maybe only kind of rely on them more for just the logistics standpoint. Like I've heard you compare is something similar, compare like the big tech monopolies in terms of how you've kind of got these gatekeepers that are kind of like the Amazon with the, or are they the Apple App Store, or, Amazon, you have to give them your 30% to sell on their platform. Can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, I think there's probably two core questions in there. One is kind of how did the three-tier system evolve to just be, I don't like to use the term monopolized, but just so aggregated or concentrated,
Yeah.
like many other businesses. That's the first one. And to answer that one quickly, I think that for most of the big spirit suppliers, working in the United States is incredibly complicated. It's really tough because it's almost like Europe. Every state, it's like working in 50 different markets. And so you need different distributors and route to market, and there's different laws and compliance. And so I think the smart and now very large distributors took note of that and said, okay, we want to be that partner where we can get you in all 50 states. You work with one person. We handle all your inventory and pricing. We pay our bills on time. We can open up all the doors. And then you had the retail side as well. You look at like the Total Wine and Moores of the world and the Bevmos, and they thought, okay, being a one-stop shop, they kept also expanding their footprint. And so there's the larger retailers kind of took over and the larger distributors kind of took over, and it created a very unified and a more simplistic system of operations. So you route to market to get your brands to market. And you couple that with 2 or 3 decades of low interest rates and easy money, to make the comparison, you look at like an Amazon, you forget how hard it is to physically pick up a product and import it, put it on a boat, get into the United States, get across country, rail, over the road. It is incredibly complex. And so Bezos was very clear about it. He's like, I'm going to spend billions and billions of dollars to build out the infrastructure that we need in order to handle the volume. And once you do that, it's, you're basically the only person that can now distribute the millions of cases for these large suppliers. And so the investment in infrastructure and ease of access to the total market by the expansion of these distributors has made it very easy now for the larger players to partner with them. Now, the bad news is they probably can't go anywhere. There's no one else that's investing this type of money in infrastructure. And so it does really, in order to attract the suppliers, building the infrastructure, the distributors really do lean heavily on their supplier partners because it's such a big piece of their portfolio. These guys are so entrenched that's really the only way you can operate is to have control or as much sway power as possible with your distributor.
Yeah.
The three-tier system too also has become incredibly complex because your buddy in the whiskey business is right. And for those that don't know or are new to this space, since prohibition, me as the producer, the marketer of the beverage, the owner of the beverage alcohol brand, I can't just go sell to the consumer, any consumer. Every state, I have to have a different distributor where I physically sell my product and then they own it. And then they sell it to the retailer who then
Yeah.
owns it. And then they eventually, then the consumer can go and buy our products. And that is a really difficult system to operate in because you're only getting a fraction of the gross merchandise value. And then you spend millions of dollars to drive traffic to other people's retail stores. And so that makes it a very challenging environment. And then you mentioned 5 tier. I really do believe for the smaller suppliers in the early stages, like you really kind of need a broker or somebody with the contacts and connections to get you into the right distributors and really understand how to get your market, your brand to market. And then from a consumer perspective, you see this with GoPuff and Uber Eats and DoorDash. And, the consumers are getting more inept or more adapted to purchasing alcohol online. And so now you've got this front end delivery service platform, the e-commerce platform, and everywhere along in that entire supply chain and that 5 tier system, there's just different additional costs that you incur as a brand owner, and it gets more expensive and more difficult at the end of the day. And I think that's it's an inhibitor for a lot of people that are starting out.
What should the distributor search and kind of selection process look like? What should they have top of mind? Any red flags they should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, the biggest thing is I always think like product basics, right? Like what's the total acquirable market? So if you look at the United States, the top 20 markets do 80 to sometimes 90% of the business. So I think everyone wants to be everywhere at once. That's probably not the right way to go. So be strategic first off on the size of the market. Make sure you start somewhere where there's enough share to go build your business. Once you do that, that'll kind of give you a sense of who you need to partner with. And as you start looking state to state, there's really 3 different types of distributors, right? You've got your franchise, which is a whole nother topic of conversation, control, in which the government actually owns sometimes the distributor and the retailer. And then you've got your open markets. And I would argue for a franchise or control market, that's the last place you want to go as a new supplier. It limits your options and they're just not great environments to promote and build. And so then when you finally narrow an open state, you have to be really conscious. You're cold chained, wine, beer. What's your shelf stability? If I don't have a distributor that's really good at handling products that need to be temperature controlled, so my options disappear right there. If I am a fast moving consumer good at 5.99 and I'm convenience focused and that's where I'm going to win, I might want to choose a beer distributor who does daily deliveries and is really good at merchandising and is constantly doing turnover. If you're a spirits brand, are you going to be in grocery? Do you need the national account partnerships? And so you really need to understand the size of the market, kind of the space and the channels you're going to play. And then, talk a lot about it, but at that point too, you also have to bring the resources that make you attractive to your distributor, which generally means sales and marketing. And so if you don't have enough of that, you're not going to get access to the big distributors at first. And it really is a ladder build on how you plan to enter a market.
You also spent a good amount of time on the distributor side as well. Anything that you felt like you learned in those years that you kind of been able to bring to now the brand side that operators that have not spent time in the distributor side may just not really know, or things they would never learn that can actually be helpful for them from someone like you that actually has been on both sides?
Yeah, lots. The level of complexity at the distributor, you want to provide sales and service. Your job is to sell and account manage. The truth is, though, for what we just talked about, there's different channels and types of restaurants. There's fine dining, there's casual dining. You're dealing with thousands of SKUs sometimes in these distributors, in which you're trying to figure out not only consulting with a customer, what the customer wants, but trying to figure out like what's in the best interest of what to ship. And so I think the first lesson really learned really comes down to prioritization, is that you cannot take an already complex business and make it more complicated. And even working for some of the larger suppliers, in some cases we'd have 50 to 100 brands. How do you touch on 50 to 100 brands in the course of even 24 months? It's very difficult. And so I think that's where the next piece comes in is you really need to understand your consumer and the brand and your channel. And once you have that, you can have very specific asks for what you need. Certain number of accounts in a certain channel, maybe even with a specialized team that lives within the distributor, like a country club team or whatever it may be. And so I think the asks and the priorities need to be trimmed down to two or three things a year at most from the big ones. And your asks really need to be customized for what your distributor is good at. If they've got a specialty team and you've got the right brand, just go focus on them until you win there. And once you win there, you can move on. And I think people are trying to move too quickly through too many priorities. And what ends up happening is I've been through so many annual meetings where we go back through our 25 must get dones every year, and we haven't gotten done a single one.
Double clicking on the double cross stuff a bit more. I was curious because I know this is like your second stint there. You were there as a VP and a GM for a few years up until like, I think 2012 to 2015 under like the original founder. Then it had some successful runs at the wine group and some other ventures, and then came back I think a year or two ago as the CEO under kind of new ownership. So I'm just kind of curious what drew you back in.
Well, I'll touch quickly just on Malcolm Lloyd, who was the founder and fundraiser for the brand. I remember at the time I was with Pernod Ricard and I'm launching Absolut Miami at the Fontainebleau. And we spent probably 50 grand to deck out the pool and the bars and the whole nine yards. And this guy's sitting there buying drinks right underneath our noses at our own party, promoting his brand Double Cross. And, you know, met him for 5 minutes, didn't think much about it, and then started to take notice for the brand and saw it everywhere, every menu and back bar. And at the time in South Florida, that's really hard to do. That's a really tough market to enter. And he convinced me 6, 7 months to basically quit my decent paying secure job at Pernod and come to join this scrappy startup in New York. And I think what made it so interesting is I'd always been with large, entrenched institutional players at that point. Anheuser-Busch, Diageo. This was kind of a white, dry erase board in a sense that like it was just pure growth and didn't know what team we needed, didn't know what marketing spend we needed. It was just kind of go, go, go and figure it out as you grow the brand. And so that was really, really, really exciting. And fortunately, we lost the founder in an accident, which is what triggered my departure. That was a very sad time for the brand. But I
Yeah.
think every entrepreneur wonders, like, once you take your foot off the gas, do I actually have a brand? Do I have a consumer? Are people going to continue to come back to this? Is there any brand equity? And so I departed and not thought much about it. And I was starting to get the itch, probably much like yourself has in the past, where it's like, wonderful job at a large wine supplier, working with great people. But I genuinely was just bored and disinterested in what I was doing. And I thought, okay, now's the time to go do something else, right? Like get back into the brand building, hands-on, scrappy environment. You think you learn enough over these jobs. It's like, let's go find out. Let's go put it to use. And so I originally went to go start something else. And sure enough, just through fate, and through a couple connections, the owners, those that had taken over ownership of the brand said, listen, we have Double Cross. We got wiped out during the pandemic. We couldn't import. We lost our distribution. We spent so much time and energy on this brand. How do we jumpstart it and bring it back to life? And that's kind of where I came in, and we held hands. We've got a wonderful group of people on the cap table. There's only a handful of us, and they've known the brand for a long time. And we've got basically a 3-phase plan to build this thing back up, but do it a little bit more disciplined because you brought it up earlier. Like one of the biggest mistakes I think we were doing in the beginning is we were going way too big, way too quick with way
Yeah.
too many employees. And we basically ran out of money to market and grow the brand every couple quarters. And so you need to be practical and have a plan for having enough working capital to grow these things.
New York, New Jersey, Florida. What about those three markets made you feel like they're the right fit to really focus on?
So there's kind of lucky in that sense. Building a new brand, you really don't know who your consumer is. You need time to talk to them and tease out what's working and what's not. We had the opposite problem. We had already been in 50 states. We had done a ton of business. So it was kind of reverse engineering or diagnosing it and saying, okay, let's look at the quality of distribution. Let's look at the quality of promotion. Let's understand what our consumer looks like.
Yeah.
And I think that's one cool tool lately that we've had that we didn't have 10 or 15 years ago, which is you can turn on e-commerce and you can transact almost directly with your consumers. And then you can follow up with them. You can actually pick up the phone, which we did, and I called a ton of people that purchased our product unsolicited and really just, ask them, why do you like it? Where did you discover it? And what we basically came to find out is we kind of had a core demographic of consumers that had gravitated towards the brand. So the goal after we did that was really to build our route to market and be available where our consumers are and ignore everything else, right? It's just when you think about their customer journey, where do they live? Where do they shop? Where's our best chance of success to continue to grow and build the brand equity that we were lucky enough to already have? And that has been the core of the strategy. And so that's why we've tuned up, the markets we're in, because we feel like, and I see this a lot with other brands, if you can't be really, really good in one market with one part of the consumer base, what makes you think you're going to be good in 50 markets? And a lot of brands make that mistake and spend a fortune before they really have developed a good velocity and turn and base. And these brands eventually go away.
Yeah. Like what you're founding as of late, what's really having the most impact from a velocity standpoint and really maximizing velocity again, both on, either on premise, off premise, whichever one you kind of want to focus on, if not both. Like what have you found are strategies, tools, and tactics that are having the biggest impact these days?
So I think to touch on the on and on premise to me, and you've probably heard this, you build brands on, sell them off. And that's the way everyone had done it for a long time. And because you kill two birds with one stone, not only do you get a menu placement and some visibility on the back bar, but you're sampling. It's all tastings and samplings, and you're part of people's experiences and their occasions. And I still think that's a great way to do it. I just think, it's not what I think. You can see it in the data, is the on premise hospitality in general really took a hit during the pandemic. And it is its own skill set in bartending and hospitality and serving and back of the house. So we're in this kind of glut right now where we don't have as many restaurants as we did years ago. And more importantly, we don't have the enthusiasm and the workforce for the people that want to participate in hospitality like they used to. And so I think from an on-premise perspective, that's really, we can see it and we can feel it. And there's still some really incredibly dedicated people that are in the space, but on-premise generally, I'm trying to be a net promoter for is we need to bring back the bars, the nightclubs. We need to get more people that are interested in bartending again and interested in spirits and wine and beer. And so we need to be net promoters of that space. So I still think for all the reasons that worked before, we still build on and sell off, but with the caveat that it's going to take longer because there's less places to do it in. And then the tactics that work best, I mean, nothing beats a recommendation from bar staff and from store staff. Nothing beats liquid to lips. These have limitations in scaling. And so what we do find very helpful is, paid social, geofencing, certain types of retail accounts, and probably most importantly, the same tactic that should and always win is it goes back to what I keep saying. It's like, know where your consumer is, pick those regions, and find the best stores that are the best fit for your product. And that's what we do. We don't need 900 points of distribution in a state like New Jersey. We need 250, and we need to be very big in a small place, which means we need to show up huge where it matters. And those are the core tactics that are working. And you can get more complex from there. Customer loyalty, follow up, things like that, which I think play a huge part. You want to stay in touch with your customer, but those are where you win.
I saw you write about Gen Z, and I think you called it the health paradox, where it's like real drivers for them are like economics, social shifts, and so like intention behavior gap, I think is what you called it. Assuming I got all that right. What's your kind of thesis here, and what should spirits brands be doing in the context of this?
Yeah, it's funny that I started writing, and I always feel I'm a little embarrassed about it, just public thoughts on paper, right? But it really came down because my wife was tired of listening to me. So I needed to get it out and get it on paper. So I even appreciate you're probably one of the 5 people that read it. So thank you for that. Uh, it comes down to this. Like to boil it down, it's like what people say and what they do are very different, right? And it'd be hard for me to use the term net promoter again. I road bike, I run, I swim, I surf. Like I'm a very active person, but it doesn't mean I'm completely giving up alcohol to be a healthier person. And at the same time too, it's like I still eat pretty poorly. And so generally I would like to be healthier, but my actions though don't always, follow suit with that. And so I think when you look at kind of the health paradox, that's always the problem. And to go back to like personal consumption and expenditures on tobacco and alcohol and fast food and expenditures on supplementation and things like that, all of this is going up. And the nicotine and alcohol and all kind of your sin-based behaviors, people are still spending huge amounts of money every year, and it's growing every year on these types of activities. And I think, more broadly, I don't think that I don't think that the headlines themselves, to just touch on that for a moment, the headlines are much worse than the reality. And so the health paradox is that too, is like we're always trying to do better things for ourselves. But at the end of the day, it's not at the complete and total utter sacrifice of some of the other things that we love in life, like alcohol and going out and fast food. I did a succinct enough job summarizing that, but this also goes back to Gen Z as well. I think Gen Z gets a really bad rap for a lot of different things, but
Yeah.
it's certain. It's like there's less going out for bars and restaurants. You have matching apps to find people online. Coffee shops are getting expensive. It's $7, $8 for a latte. So I think generally Gen Z is losing the third space, that we had the luxury of being in. And even their education is migrating online. And so it's much more time in front of a screen for much longer. You're losing your third spaces. And then economically, every generation kind of matures a little bit later than the last one for a variety of reasons. And so Gen Z will be that generation that finishes grad school and starts family and gets their first job just a little bit later. And so there's a delay in their personal consumption habits and what they spend money on. But generally, what we're finding is like once you give somebody an opportunity to go get a job and earn some money and get ahead in life a little bit, they resort back to the same travel and leisure and going out and spending that everyone else does. And so I think if we just give them a little bit of a break for a couple extra years, let them catch up a little bit, I think you'll find a lot of the things that we grew up loving and doing will come back into trend purely for economic reasons.
Tying this all back to Double Cross in terms of kind of where you feel like, I don't know, the consumer landscape has kind of, evolved over time, and the Gen Z stuff as an example. Are there any ways in terms of you feel like the way that kind of Double Cross's messaging, positioning, and voice is intentionally takes some of these, I don't know, current factors, variables into account? If that makes sense?
It does. Yeah, it's so funny because I come from a world where you have 100-page brand decks,
Right.
where it's all voice, archetype, padding and spacing on the logo. I mean, there was not a thing you actually had any decision making over except for not screwing it up, which was its own challenge. And we've done a little bit of that. Like we understand you're going to win on brand. You need to have an archetype and a voice, and there's a way you're going to message to different segments of your audience. But we don't take ourselves too seriously at the end of the day, and we're not too rigid on that. Where we do have challenges is exactly where I just brought it up. The person that can afford a $50 glass of scotch or a $50 bottle of Double Cross is probably not going to be 24, fresh out of college, spending that kind of money across the bar. And so we do skew a little bit older, and we're conscious of that. But we're also conscious of the fact that if we're building it and getting it right now with a little bit of an older demographic, which is our consumer base, that eventually that when that younger generation does catch up, we'll have a lot of that messaging and kind of archetype together where I think we can reach that next wave of vodka consumers. And you brought up earlier, I think, is something about just the cyclical cycle of trends. Things are on fad and some are not, but we're seeing lifts in premium spirits and we're seeing people come back to vodka and gin. I mean, it's really hard to have a wonderful, clean, crisp, versatile spirit. When especially if you think about like the health paradox, right? Like I'm trying to be healthier. You see it in the RTDs to have an iced tea vodka, low calorie is kind of the way to go. And so we see a lot of that Atkins style kind of behavior in the 90s resurfacing now today. And so I have a funny feeling that just having a really world-class premium vodka is really going to be hard to beat if things really do get better for you in the next 10 years.
On the concept of better for you, what's your take on kind of the non-alc space, and is that something you guys have all talked about at Double Cross at all?
We do. It depends on how you categorize it, right? And to
Sure.
continue to use my tech analogies, it's just so prevalent. But if you look at Google search, 90% of the search pie, right? Hard to believe they don't own the whole thing. But if you look at them as a tech and marketing company, they're a much smaller player. And I look at non-alcohol kind of the same way. I look at it as really like, I don't look at non-alcohol as being competitive to beverage alcohol, because if someone is choosing not to drink, then what it actually does is it's not competing with beverage alcohol in the first place. They're just choosing to be in a different beverage category. And then they're really competing with sodas and spritzes and all these other types of non-alcoholic beverages or broader CPG. And so, and I don't see non-alcoholic really eating into that share. And even now, I only, the best number I've seen is almost 1% of total spending in broad alcohol share. So I'm just not as worried about it. But I would say it is nice for those that, for whatever reason, choose or cannot drink or should not be drinking, to get a nice phony Negroni. I'll promote that brand that tastes just like the real thing. It's viscous and flavorful and complex. To be able to get the experience of a Negroni, I think is really, really important, and vice versa. So I think there's a huge room for really creative, complex, flavorful beverages at the bar that's not alcoholic. But I
Yeah.
don't really worry about it taking away from alcohol in in the grand scheme of things. It's like the Dow's down 1,000 points. You're like, what does that
Right.
even mean? And it's like 0.001% of the market, you know?
That is a great analogy. Yeah, it's been awesome, Harry. Well, I'm curious, like last question for you in terms of this could be, I'll let you take it however you want. This could be in the BevAlc space, or maybe it's just another CPG verticals for whatever reason. Any brands in general across all of CPG or specific trends that you've been kind of, I don't know, keeping your eye on, things that have kind of piqued your interest, things that you think are interesting that are happening as of late?
I would love to say that I'm going to be ahead of the trend curve, but I always joke around. Like if you just go to, the product expos that take place on both coasts, and you kind of, you kind of see what's happening. It's like protein is undeniably going to be in everything, from your coffee to your waffles, maybe even to your next vodka drink. I
I was
don't
about to
know.
say, vodka might be coming.
Yeah, yeah. There, Mike the Situation owned a brand. The guy from Jersey Shore owned a brand called, it's going to escape me, but it was a protein-based vodka years and years and years ago. People thought he was crazy. I'm like, he was just too early.
I guess so.
Uh, yeah, no, so funny. So you never know. But what I think is going to eventually happen is I think you're going to start seeing fatigue in Better For You, because if you look at the CPI, the price to get protein and everything now is way, way higher. Egos with protein are going to run you 3x. AG1 has had some interesting studies done on being a really expensive glorified multivitamin. So what I worry about is that as everyone is spending share of dollar to get healthier and do better, that the products themselves need to deliver on that. And that is one thing that worries me. But I think more broadly in the food trend, that's what I'm keeping an eye on, is like how much runway and protein do we need, at least in the next 2 years? And we're about to find out.
I think we are. Yeah, I think we're done. We'll see.
Yeah.
Harry, this has been awesome. I appreciate the time. This has been super fun. What's the best place for people to follow along with you and some of your writings, like the health paradox stuff? And then what's the best place for people to follow along with Double Cross as well?
Man, I would say anything double cross related, info at doublecrossvodka.com. We live in that inbox. We talk to everybody through there. Please reach out. Also very active on LinkedIn, as I think most people have to be nowadays. That's become an evolving platform. Shoot me a note. I'm pretty active there. And if not, I have someone keeping an eye on my inbox.
Perfect. Awesome, Harry. Appreciate the time. I think that's the pod.